My English journey, elementary school to the present day, Patrick McClure. My earliest memories of reading come from my mother and father reading to me in the evenings. Authors like Richard Scarry, Alvin Trussell, and Margaret Wise. In elementary school, after a family vacation, I remember being handed a stack of books and having it explained to me that I would have to start reading them on my own. And I, in my memory, I just opened them up and started reading them. That's obviously not true. Um, in elementary school, I began to associate reading, writing, and English class with success because I didn't really seem to struggle with it like a lot of my classmates did. Math, however, was a different story. Constant source of frustration. Here's my childhood reading list. Autumn Harvest by Alvin Trussell, Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise, Wake Up City by Alvin Trussell. In middle school, I found most of the books to be kind of tedious and boring. My dad began to collect books from greatest novels of the 20th century lists, so I started to borrow them. The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, some of the books that I read at the time. I admit now that I probably didn't understand 60%, 70% of what I read in some of the books. But it was very exciting finding books like that, being exposed to more difficult literature and stuff like On the Road, which just at the time seemed like the coolest thing in the entire world. During a music history class in 6th grade, I was introduced to the Beatles and Bob Dylan by my teacher. This led to an all-consuming passion for music. I also began to read music criticism, music history, biographies on musicians, or musical movements, and it's something I still do. I still read a lot of books about music. One bad memory I do have from middle school is being compelled to complete what seemed to be endless amounts of grammar exercises and sentence diagrams. Terrible stuff. We got Milan Kundera here, On the Road, Jack Kerouac, and Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. The movie Apocalypse Now is basically just Heart of Darkness. High school. In high school, I took AP classes. I took the AP tests. English was still my favorite subject. I wrote for my school newspaper, which was a lot of fun. It helped me find some more economy in my writing, not write quite so flowery, florid. Like in middle school, I found the assigned reading to be very dull. A Tale of Two Cities was awful, painful. I still hate it. I also was not a big fan of Shakespeare, still am not really something I would ever read. But my teachers in junior and senior year gave us a little more leeway, kind of more of like a list of books we could choose to read. In my spare time, I continued to read literature and music criticism. Some memorable books include Catch-22, Robert Run, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But my reading habits really began to subside around that time because of the academic workload and just going out more. Got my license and my first car, so wasn't reading as much. College years. My critical thinking and analytic skills increased a lot during this time. I seemed to write endless amounts of essays, which really helped my writing. But I began to read less fiction for pleasure, and really began to read less for pleasure in general. Most of my reading was confined to music criticism, music history. Began to read more newspaper articles, news magazines. One notable fiction author that I was exposed to at this time was a Chilean author named Roberto Bolaño. Another really important event for me, though, was being exposed to graphic novels by a literature teacher I had. He had a graphic novel called Ice Haven on the assigned reading list, and I was stunned that we would be reading a comic book. But I loved it, and it really made me confront my prejudices about what I considered to be legitimate literature. Stuff like Harry Potter, which I'd always considered something that children would read. I now reassessed my feelings about graphic novels or fantasy fiction. So we got college reading list. My most recent positive experience in my English journey was studying for the CBEST and CSET. It really provided a valuable refresher on grammar, history of the English literature, linguistic elements. I still read a lot of music criticism and a lot of news magazines, newspaper, but I've gotten back into reading fiction a little bit more through the work of authors like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Ross MacDonald. Those are detective or noir fiction from between the 1930s and 1960s. Sometimes people call it hard-boiled fiction. But yeah, my reading interests go in cycles, but what remains constant is the outlet that jumping into another person's thoughts and emotions give me. Reading is a temporary refuge from reality. It's an escape hatch, but it's also a way of engaging more deeply with the world. It's an old friend and a new discovery. It can be tremendously exciting, and I hope I can make that meaningful for my students. There we go. Thanks so much, guys.